Hello and welcome to week 13 in Developmental Psych. And we are in chapter 9, late adulthood. We're coming to the end of the class. And just over some housekeeping around that, it's time to really start wrapping up your biography projects. And then once you've submitted those biography projects, moving on to the reflection paper. And I hope this process has been enjoyable to you. But just keep an eye on the course. Used to be Navigator, the course outline, and get that due date. Make sure you get those assignments in. So we're going to be talking about late life right now, and chapter 9 out of 10, late adulthood, and it doesn't have to be a decline like we usually, at least I'm hoping. I personally am experiencing, trugging right along. I'm 56 years old, no intention to ever not be able to, well, I can't hula hoop, but, do something like that. But two things are happening. There's an effort upon people to have the most enriching good late life as they can, while at the same time, there's biology and gravity and time that is just taking its toll. So, here's where we want to be, and here's where the vast majority of people do end up when they're looking at late life. However, I'm sorry, I was going to show this video here. This is listed in the course book. Please go look at this, and it kind of emphasizes the accomplishments of people late in life. And when we look at an image like this and we see the natural process of an individual aging and becoming older, I'm a little disappointed that they don't show everybody smiling. It's okay. Some of the elderly faces look like they're frowning all the time whenever I was looking at images like this. But we want to ask ourselves, why is this happening? Why do we age? What are the physiological factors, time factors, genetic factors, biological factors that lead a person in terms of the changes in their body over time? So we want to take some time looking at those so we can understand that biological process. First and foremost, we have genetics. The actual built into the genetic code are aspects of our genes that will actually destroy cells. They'll basically commit suicide on those cells after a certain amount of time. So there's mechanisms built in. We assume that a short lifespan, actually, or shorter than, theoretically it could be, from a evolutionary point of view, allows for more generations over time. So fast reproducing species, you can actually see the process of evolution taking place more rapidly. I remember when I was in biology class, we used to deal with traits that were in fruit flies, whether they had red eyes, or I think that's the only one I remember, the red eyes or green eyes or whatever. And because they reproduce every 14 days or something like that, through the semester you could actually have successive generations and actually do crossbreeding and whatnot and see different traits actually manifest. Very Mendelian genetics, kind of that, as you could actually predict the traits from the offspring, because the lifespan was really short and you could see multiple generations in a small amount of time. In addition to the genetic Grim Reapers, we have damage to the actual DNA itself. The DNA molecule, a model of which is on the screen, deteriorates. The bonds begin to break, and the actual process of creating our body cellular tissue that is encoded into the DNA molecule becomes less and less accurate. And then finally, within the cells themselves, these what you probably learned a long time ago, the little batteries that operate within each one of our cells, mitochondria, they themselves have their own DNA, and they themselves age and become less and less effective in terms of providing energy for the cell. Now, another cellular aspect, we're looking at the larger structures here above the level of the DNA molecule and looking at actual chromosomes, is the chemical telomerase, or telomeres, which is the best example I've ever seen to explain, almost a universal example, is if you think that your chromosome is like the shoelaces on your shoes, and the little plastic tips that keep them from fraying is the telomerase molecule that's at the end, and that gets shorter every time the cell replicates. The telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. It can still do the job effectively right until there's just a little ring, just like on shoelaces. The telomeres keep the shoelaces together, keep the genetic shoelaces together. But once they're gone, it's just a matter of days maybe before that shoelace will fray. And the same thing happens with our chromosomes, and those particular cells can no longer divide. So it's cellular clock theory is what they're looking at. How many times can this have? How many divisions? Some say maybe 100, 150. A cell can divide over the course of its lifespan before the telomeres get so small they can no longer maintain the integrity structure of the chromosome, and therefore the cell can no longer replicate. Another thing that's going on is this is both a situation of nutrition, but also of environmental dangers, and this is the idea of free radicals, which are, I believe, positively charged. You see on the right here, this is obviously a cartoon. You have positively charged. There's a missing electron, and what happens is, as we undergo respiration, these oxygen molecules with a missing electron bond onto cellular tissue and essentially burn a hole. There's energy released with that bond. I'm guessing this is how the mechanisms work, simply by chemistry. But that free radical is looking for another electron, and when that electron bond happens, there's an energy release, and you get tissue damage with this. So we take antioxidants as either as supplements, or we eat antioxidant food, and that reduces those materials actually degenerate in our body by attracting that same sort of spoiling that would occur, except it happens through digestion, and kind of occupies the attention of those free radicals within our body. But over time, free radicals damage tissue. They damage our skin, so it loses its elasticity. It damages the lens in our eyes, so it doesn't flex like it used to, and we become nearsighted or farsighted. Those kinds of damage to tissue over time, kind of reflecting a lot, each one of these causes reflecting in those pictures of that one lady that is aging that I showed a little bit before. So we have free radicals that are inducing some of the changes that we call aging. And then we have immune system and hormone changes that occur over time. Our immune system becoming less effective at fighting off disease, and hormone changes leading to other kinds of chronic conditions related to aging. Now, it's interesting to consider the concept of a chronic condition, because this is, chronic aging conditions. These are relatively new in the history of humanity. Not a lot of people lived until late age. They've always lived until late age, but a lot of the people who did were robust. They had been able to fight off disease. They'd have been able to, stay healthy, probably exercised, and just had strong bodies and were able to make it there. It wasn't widespread that individuals suffered from long-term illnesses, because those illnesses usually took them out. And so it's more in the modern era that we see this manifestation of long-term degrading of the body while the person is still using it, and thus a lot of individuals experiencing this aging process. Another aspect of aging has to do with stress, and this is how we approach our lives. How do we approach aging? How do we approach managing our lives? Stress itself increases the release of cortisol, which is a chemical that readies the body for flight or fight. So what happens, it's not that the release of cortisol ages us. It's that if we're always under stress, then there's always too much cortisol in our body, and we start to get these long-term effects of living under stress, that we have anxiety, depression, headaches, a weakened immune system, heart disease, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, digestive issues, nerve problems, all because of cortisol. And interestingly enough, I just learned today watching another video that when we have cortisol in our body, we crave high sugar foods. So when we are under stress and we have cortisol in our body a lot, we tend to get the munchies, and thus that leads to issues with the weight gain, obesity, cardiovascular issues in terms of cholesterol, lack of activity, all of things. It's kind of a quadruple whammy when we have stress over long periods of time and we don't have the skill set to manage that stress, to either lessen the number of stressors in our life or manage our physical reactions and emotional reactions to stress when it does occur. Now, one of the things that we talk about in developmental psych is life expectancy, and we can look up charts and whatnot. But I want to make it clear that we have a good understanding of what does life expectancy actually mean. And when we look at, they're called actuary charts, and you can look this up on the Social Security website. You look up a given year, say 2015, you look at how old you were in 2015, and you go over, and the chart will tell you how many years you have left. Okay? What life expectancy actually means, if we look at life expectancy, let's say for ancient Rome, as far as we can tell, life expectancy was around 30. It was really low. Now, that doesn't mean that people in that particular year were going to be dead by 30. What that actually means is for a given year, and each year has a different life expectancy because of technology and medical care and whatnot. So let's say we're looking at a particular year in Roman history. What 30 means is people who are born in that year, 30 years from now, 50% of them will be dead. That's what life expectancy is. Now, there's a quick drop-off at the end, but that's the 50% mark. You know, a lot of people live, and then it reaches that 50% mark. Half of the people that were born in that year have died. Half of the people are still alive. And then there's that range of years up to maybe, a maximum of maybe 120 where, people start dropping off a little bit faster as it peaks out. So life expectancy is for, like, say, the year of my birth is, I think I looked it up, it was like 73. So I'm 56. Yeah, I got less than 20 years to go. Not fun. But that's, of course, there's all kinds of other factors where you can actually go into online tools and you can actually put in whether you're a smoker, how much exercise you have, what kind of work you do, and all these other factors that contribute. And I think I got my life expectancy up there in the 80s somewhere. But what that life expectancy means is everybody born in 1965, if I look at the actuary tables, 50% of us will be gone by 73. At River 73. I'm hoping not to be one of them. And so that's what those life expectancy tables actually mean. So here we're looking at North America, Canada, and the USA. North America that would include Mexico and Canada. These life expectancies here, this is for 2015, I believe. 2015, the USA for kids born in 2015. In the United States, we'll see that the males are expected to, 50% of them are supposed to be dead by 76 years later. And for women, it's 81 years later is when 50% of those individuals have passed away. Thus, influenced highly by lifestyle choices, behaviors, and habits. So the lifestyles that we lead and the choices we make, how we eat, exercising, all of those things. Let's switch gears a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the topics that is actually in the discussion, and that is the topic of memory. We often think about when we're aging that our memory gets it. We might get an elder moment or something like that when we're talking about that we've forgotten something we would normally not ever forget. There are some changes that occur in memory over time because the nervous system, for one, there's death of cellular tissue, just for all the reasons that we've talked about. It's death of brain cells. Their neurotransmitters are not being produced as efficiently as they were before. And myelin degrades over time. Myelin is the fatty tissue that gathers around axons and increases the speed of neurons and coordination, but also in terms of thought processing. And we can see where damage to the brain, lack of neurochemistry being produced, and also a slower, more sluggish nervous system leads to some of the characteristic behaviors that we might associate with the elderly. But let's look specifically at memory and see we can see how that manifests. And so when we look at the effects on memory, we want to look at the different kinds of memory. Now, episodic memory is the memory of specific events. And we can imagine that these are stored within cellular clusters in the brain of associated concepts. Those undergo degradation with the degradation of the rest of the cellular tissue in the body, so these will fade over time. However, semantic memory, the meanings of words, concepts, these too are associated in clusters, but because they're so concrete and they've been there for so long, they're often mapped across the entire brain in many areas. So the degradation of the brain, the slowing down of the nervous system and whatnot, doesn't necessarily have an impact on those things. Individuals even with Alzheimer's and those kinds of diseases will often still be able to identify what a chair is, because a chair is mapped all over their brain. It's not just in, let's say, an episodic memory section of the brain. And the other part of the memory, the autobiographical memory, it's impacted by the loss of episodic memory. There are better times. Age 10 to 30 is where elderly people have the best memories. However, they're highly influenced by external and internal aids. So, as I'm going to ask you to relate in the assessment section about the memory processes of your subjects, think about your subjects telling their stories. And the easy flowing stories of their life might come from that early 10 to 30 years old or whatnot, or maybe not. Each individual is different. That's what you'll reflect to me about. However, if they have scrapbooks or pictures or items in the house or, memorabilia and stuff, and as soon as they get that, the memory was somewhere, because as soon as they see that picture, they're like, oh, I was 40 years old, here's the story. That cue, that retrieval process, allows the individual to experience that memory again. And I think that that's profoundly interesting, and it has to do that the episodic memory may be degrading, but with cues that activate other parts of the brain, maybe they can access the other areas of the brain in which those memories were stored. Now, they might be not exact copies, but good enough. Autobiographical memory is sort of a mix and match of fact and fiction anyway. So therefore, the rich memories that come from these kinds of cues are often, a mix of the real events that were there and some blanks that were filled in order to complete the story. And that's the individual's autobiographical memory. Very, very influenced by cues and whatnot that are in their immediate environment. Now, of course, in late life, we're still making our way around this circle of Erickson's, and we're looking here at maturity, ego integrity versus despair. We are entering into the part of life where the individual is aware that the next stage is passing or dying. They are, however, unlike the midlife crisis, they're at the point where maybe it's too late to make some of those changes. Now, I'm really reluctant to say that. I mean, when you look at, healing relationships, when you're looking at any sort of last minute things, certainly there's time for that, and time is of essence because there's not a lot of time for it, but it's not the time to start a new career. It's not, those kinds of things. And the individual is actually, as Erickson observed, engaged in a very rich process of what he called the life review. This is why in this class I ask you to interview someone in late life. I picked 65, but the later the better, because that individual is actually naturally in the process of reviewing their life, tying it all together, basically stringing together the tapestry that's going to be their life and legacy, with some evaluative comments, along the way, maybe I could have done better here, maybe I could have done better. And the entire balance at the end of the day is going to be, did I lead a good life and I have integrity and I'm leaving a good, a fairly good legacy, or is late life full of regrets and I should have done it differently, and despair? And the despair comes, the despair being the epitome of sadness and depression, is because it's too late now to do things about it. Or the perception is that it's too late to do things. Or the individuals around, if you've hurt people, let's say those individuals are no longer accepting of your efforts even for reconciliation, and it's now too late. And that individual can suffer greatly with despair. Now, as a social worker, I've experienced both extremes, working with the elderly who were approaching the end of their lives, some of whom, for whatever, their integrity was amazing, they were happy, they were joyful, they were sick and in pain, didn't seem to matter a whole lot, they were surrounded by people when they passed, and had what we would call a good death. And yet, and I think I might be going into this some in the next chapter when we talk about end of life, but I've also met individuals who led life with some pretty poor decisions and ended up with a very uncomfortable bed to sleep in. And I mean that symbolically. And so really rough time for those individuals who are in despair. Now, there's a section in the course book that goes into the work of Valiant, who has connections to the big Harvard study on human development. Great stuff that's coming out of that, and teaching us about aging well. And I really want you to go through that information and understand it really well, and the decisions you can make now that impact your life later on. Recently, the new director of that particular program came out with a video, a TED Talk, and he kind of narrowed it down. He narrowed it down to friends, family, and community. Individuals in old age who have been able to manage their friends, meaning replace the friends that go away with new friends, replace old workers with new playmates, workmates being replaced with playmates, maintain family connections and a deep connection to the community, are happier. And it's happier regardless of the other stuff going on, regardless of their finances, regardless. Now, this is statistics, so you got to look at this, from a big number perspective, but those three factors predicted happiness way more than other factors predicted unhappiness. So even though they might be ill, sick, dying, as long as they weren't alone, as long as they had friends and community, family, they were happy. Very, very important. And those individuals, particularly in the Harvard study that they followed for years and years, are individuals who nurtured family, friends, and community very early in life, or they didn't wait till the end, very early. So right now, nurturing a sense of connection with your friends, people at work, playmates, family, and community as a planning for aging well. Do it now so you have those strength in those communities later on. The final topic I really can't lecture on, and that's the wagon wheel, which is an essay put out by a colleague of mine who has now passed away, named Bob Vion. He used to teach at KVCC, and he taught developmental psych with me, and he would always include this essay in his class. And so when he retired, I asked if I could include it. This is several years ago. Asked if I could include that essay in my classes, and now it's in the course book. And I hope it does him good honor. He himself was a ever-changing, ever-moving forward force of reckon. He was very strong intellect. He had multiple degrees. He was very, very philosophical. He was a pastor. He was a philosopher. He was a psychologist. He was a lot of different things, a profound thinker, and reflected deeply on his own aging. And I think this is what this essay represents, is his thoughts about what it means to age and the importance of elderly people in the world. Maybe a little self-serving, but certainly the wisdom that elderly people bring, because simply being able to survive this long and the different experiences that they have, the sense of history of what things were like and changes that they've experienced, and how valuable this is, and how so many times those individuals are not part of the dialogue. So I hope you enjoy that particular essay. And so that's my little wagon wheel picture here. And then we move into the assessment section, where the discussion is to reflect on the wagon wheel and that essay and what it means to you and the elderly people in your life. And then in the quiz, not the discussion, I thought it was the discussion, I mentioned that earlier. In the quiz, I'm going to ask you to reflect on the memory of your subject. What was that like? Did it match these expectations? Was there that 10 to 30? Were there items that you came across in the household, or let's say a photo album or a scrapbook, that elicited very rich memories? Or were they, they could tell, what they wore that day in 1946? And, very sharp memories and whatnot. Just kind of reflect on your experience and having an individual go back into the archives and tell the story of their lives to you. I hope you see a good appreciation as to what that project is and how sharing it is for someone to tell their life story, and that it's been as enriching to you as it will be for me. I'm in the best chair here. I get to read all of them. And I don't benefit from the actual interview process, but I certainly have enjoyed reading all of these biographies over the years and getting to know absolutely amazing people. And so I look forward to that coming soon, part of my work. And hopefully those are all coming together for you pretty quickly. And I will see you in the discussion boards, and have a great week as weather gets better and summer's coming. So I will see you later and have a great week.